Close your eyes and imagine America 100 years ago, standing at the threshold of the 1920s. It was called the Roaring Decade, a time when jazz spilled into the night air, when automobiles rattled down dirt roads, when radios crackled for the very first time in living rooms, and when the nation felt both ancient and brand new all at once. The war was over, the old century fading, and something dazzling, something restless, was pressing forward. For the rich, it was champagne poured behind velvet curtains. For the poor, it was long days in crowded factories and nights in cramped tenements. For farmers, it was the hum of a Model T pulling into the yard, changing forever what it meant to live on the land. America was in motion, no longer bound by distance, no longer confined by silence. A single decade would redraw the map of daily life, and yet, beneath the glitter and the promise, shadows lingered. The same decade that gave birth to radios, speakeasies, and Hollywood dreams was also laying the fragile foundations that would crumble into the Great Depression. It was a time of contrasts, of laughter and hardship, of progress and fragility. Welcome back to Sleepy Town Radio, where we tell quiet stories for quiet hearts. If you've been with us before, you know these journeys are meant to soothe, to carry you gently into rest while bringing history close enough to touch. And if you're new here, we're glad you've joined us. If this story speaks to you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and to subscribe so you can drift with us through many more nights of American memory. A like or share helps others find these stories too. But for now, just settle in. Tonight, we'll step softly into the 1920s. We'll wander through the dim hallways of a New York tenement, where the morning begins with cold floors and the sound of neighbors coughing. We'll walk the wide fields of Iowa, where a farm family greets the dawn with calloused hands and quiet prayers. We'll stroll down a small-town main street where a radio hums in a shop window and the theater marquee glows with silent film stars. And we'll glimpse the chandeliers of a great house by Lake Michigan where fortunes rise and illusions glitter. The decade ahead will roar with energy and invention. But in these first moments, as the nation stands on the edge of change, let's pause. Let's breathe it in slowly and see what life was really like in 1920s America. The scene shifts now, from the wide promise of a new decade to a single narrow room in New York City, 1921. The day begins not with comfort, but with sound. Thin walls do little to keep the world at bay. Voices drift through plaster, pipes clank in protest. A baby cries down the hall. The air itself feels heavy, laced with coal smoke and the faint dampness of old brick. Inside the room, space is measured in inches rather than feet. 2 iron-framed beds push against opposite walls, their mattresses sagging and lumpy, their blankets thin against the chill of January. One is already empty. A brother bends over a wash basin balanced precariously on a chair, splashing icy water on his face. His breath rises in small clouds, each exhale a reminder of how little the coal stove in the next room can reach this far corner of the apartment. The other bed still holds the figure of someone reluctant to stir. Warmth is scarce here, and leaving the fragile cocoon of blanket feels almost unbearable. Cold seeps up through the wooden floorboards, making every step a small act of courage. Light filters weakly through a single window, its frame loose, the glass fogged with condensation. beyond it, there is no open view, only the brick wall of the next building, so close that one could nearly reach across and touch it. Privacy is traded for survival, and survival rarely leaves room for beauty. This 10 by 10 square of space is home to 2 young men, though calling it a bedroom almost flatters it. The rest of the family occupies the apartment's remaining rooms, a cramped kitchen that also serves as a gathering space, a second bedroom stuffed with parents and sisters, and a closet-sized water closet that feels like a luxury compared to the outhouses some neighbors still endure. Bathing, when it happens, is not here at all but at the public bathhouse, once a week if luck and money allow. There is no softness in the details. Clothing is stacked in corners, patched and repatched, worn until fabric nearly dissolves. The alarm clock ticking on the crate beside the bed is a hard-won possession. Its cost nearly a week's wages at the garment factory. But missing a shift is not an option. In this neighborhood, work is survival, and there is always someone waiting to take your place if you falter. The sounds of mourning grow louder. A mother coughs in the kitchen as she coaxes the coal stove to life. Somewhere deeper in the building, another family begins an argument, their voices carrying like unwelcome companions. In these walls, privacy is not expected. Every cough, every cry, every whispered secret belongs to the building as much as to the family. The young man finally swings his legs over the edge of the bed. The shock of the cold floor pulls him fully awake. He pulls on wool socks with worn-through toes, trousers patched at the knees, a shirt stitched and restitched by his mother's weary hands. Clothing here is not fashion, but endurance, each item stretched until nothing remains but threads. There is a heaviness to the morning ritual. It is not the kind of heaviness that comes from laziness or comfort, but from the weight of knowing that every day begins the same. Work waits, rent waits, hunger waits. The landlord's knock is never far from mind, nor is the fear of eviction. In this place, security is as fragile as the drafty window glass, and yet, for all its scarcity, there is life here too. The bond of family, the sound of siblings preparing together, the quiet resilience that grows in the cracks of hardship. The room may be small, the bed may sag, the blankets may fail to keep out the cold, but still, another morning has come. And with it, the chance to push forward, to take another step into the uncertain promise of the decade. Soon the family will gather in the kitchen for breakfast, stretching what little they have to fill hungry stomachs before the day's long labor begins. But for now, in this dim bedroom of a New York tenement, the story of the 1920s is already unfolding, etched into the struggle of ordinary lives, lived out in spaces where survival itself feels like a daily victory. From the chill of the bedroom, the story drifts toward the narrow kitchen where the day truly begins. The heart of the tenement is not a hearth in the old sense, but a coal stove pressed into service against the draft. It is here that a mother bends, coaxing reluctant flames to life, her breath misting in the cold morning air. The room is small, no larger than a pantry, but it holds the weight of the family's survival. The smell of coal smoke mixes with the faint scent of yesterday's boiled cabbage. A dented pot rests on the stove, waiting for water to heat. The mother's hands, rough and chapped from endless scrubbing and mending, move with practiced rhythm. She knows how to stretch $1 until it frays. A few scoops of oats, a heel of bread, perhaps the dregs of coffee carefully saved. These are the ingredients of endurance. Children begin to filter into the room, their hair mussed, eyes still heavy from restless sleep. They crowd around the table, which is nothing more than a scarred wooden board balanced on uneven legs. The youngest tugs at her mother's sleeve, asking in a whisper if there will be sugar today. The answer is a gentle shake of the head. Sugar is for holidays, for Christmas or Easter, not for an ordinary weekday when rent is due and wages run thin. The father has already slipped out before dawn, his boots echoing down the stairwell as he makes his way to the docks. His labor is paid in cash at the end of the week, uncertain, irregular, and always less than the family needs. That absence is felt now, in the quiet scrape of spoons against chipped bowls, in the silence between bites where conversation should be. The meal is simple, oatmeal thinned with water, flavored only by a pinch of salt. Bread, cut in small slices so each child has something to hold. Coffee stretched with chicory, bitter but warming. It is not abundance, but it is enough to face the long hours ahead. Every mouthful is a reminder of both struggle and determination. The mother watches her children closely. She sees the hollow places beneath their eyes, the two slender wrists that should be round with youth. She hides her worry behind small gestures, a gentle touch on a shoulder, a reminder to eat slowly, a murmured prayer in her native tongue before lifting her own spoon. She eats last, as she always does, making sure there is enough for everyone else before she takes what remains. Through the thin walls, the building seems to rise in chorus. Other families are doing the same, stoking stoves, portioning food, urging children to hurry for school or work. The sounds of dozens of households bleed together into a single soundtrack of survival. Laughter and tears, arguments and lullabies, the constant rhythm of immigrant life in the early 1920s. Outside the window, the city begins to stir. A cart rattles past, wheels striking cobblestones. Somewhere down the street, a vendor shouts his morning wares. The world presses in on this little kitchen, reminding the family that they are part of something larger. A city teeming with millions, each facing their own morning, their own fragile balance between hope and hunger. As the children finish their bowls, they gather scarves and caps, mended again and again until the fabric is more patch than cloth. One by one, they leave the table, ready to step into a world of long hours, some to school, others to factories or shops. The mother lingers in the doorway, watching them go. She feels both pride and sorrow, pride in their resilience, sorrow in the childhood slipping too quickly away. The kitchen grows quiet once more. The last spoon clinks against the pot. The last crumbs are brushed from the table. Another morning has been survived. Another day begun. It is not abundance that sustains this family, but endurance and the unspoken bond that ties them together. And so, with hunger momentarily eased and spirits steadied, the household turns toward the next chapter of their day, the streets of New York, where the city itself waits with noise, motion, and challenge. Beyond the kitchen door lies a world that is anything but quiet. By the time the children step onto the street, the city has already begun its restless song. New York in 1921 awakens not gently, but with a clamor that rolls like thunder through its avenues and alleys. Cobblestones echo with the iron-shod hooves of delivery horses, their breath steaming in the cold as they pull wagons heavy with milk, ice, or coal. The wheels rattle, striking each stone with a rhythm as old as the city itself. Over this comes the cry of vendors, voices in English, in Italian, in Yiddish, in a dozen tongues, calling out fresh bread, roasted chestnuts, apples sold by the bushel. The air is thick with the mingling of scents, smoke from coal fires, brine from fishmongers, the sweet sharpness of oranges stacked in pyramids on wooden carts. Children dart through it all, their laughter high and fleeting, a quick counterpoint to the grumble of streetcars. Barefoot or bundled in patched shoes, they chase each other between wagons, weaving through the traffic with a reckless freedom that adults cannot afford. Their games rise and fall with the same intensity as the city's heartbeat, oblivious to the dangers that press in from every side. On the sidewalks, the movement never ceases. Men stride with lunch pails in hand, faces still heavy from sleep, heading toward factories, docks, and workshops. Women carry baskets on their hips, pushing through the crowd toward the market before prices climb too high. There is little leisure here, only urgency, the unspoken knowledge that to hesitate is to fall behind. The buildings loom above it all, block after block of brick tenements, their windows patched with cloth, laundry strung from one side of the alley to the other like tired flags. From above, water drips steadily where pipes leak. From below, the hiss of steam rises through vents, carrying the damp smell of basements and cellars. At the corner, a streetcar grinds to a halt, sparks leaping from the overhead wire as it screeches against the track. Passengers spill out, some clutching newspapers with bold headlines about politics, prohibition raids, or the price of bread. Others carry only themselves, weary already before the day has even begun. Inside, more bodies push forward, squeezing into the car until it rattles off again, packed tighter than the tenements themselves. The city does not belong to one people or one voice. It is a tapestry of languages and accents, stitched together in sound. Italian grandmothers gossip in doorways. Irish laborers trade jokes on corners. Jewish shopkeepers open their shutters, the smell of bagels drifting out into the street. Each voice is distinct, but together they form the chorus of immigrant New York. There are moments of beauty hidden in the noise. A young musician, perched on the steps of a stoop, lifts a battered violin and draws out a tune that dances above the traffic. A horse shakes its mane, catching the morning sun on strands of steam. A child pauses in play to press her nose against a bakery window, eyes wide at the sight of pastries she may never taste. But the hardships are not hidden either. A beggar leans against a wall, hand outstretched, ignored by most who pass. A policeman shouts at a pushcart vendor whose permit is long expired. The streets carry both the weight of survival and the promise of opportunity, and no one can tell which will arrive on any given day. For those leaving the tenement behind, this daily passage through the streets is as essential as bread. It is the artery through which the city flows, chaotic, relentless, but alive with possibility. Every face in the crowd carries its own story, each step pushing against hardship toward a future that remains uncertain. And so, the morning unfolds. not in silence, but in the symphony of a city rising with the sun. The children move with it, blending into the restless tide, their small figures swallowed by the scale of New York itself. Ahead waits the long day of labor, but in this moment, the streets are their classroom, their playground, and their proving ground. The streets eventually lead to doors that few enter willingly, but many cannot escape. The doors of the factory. Behind them, the city's restless noise is replaced by another kind of sound, harsher and more relentless. The clatter of machines. The garment factory sprawls across a single floor of a warehouse, its windows clouded with soot, its air thick with the scent of oil, dust, and fabric dye. Light filters dimly through the grime, turning day into a gray half-light that makes time feel slippery and unending. Inside, rows upon rows of sewing machines stretch as far as the eye can follow, each one occupied by bent shoulders and weary eyes. The shift has only begun, yet fatigue already shows. Men and women, many no older than their teenage years, work with a rhythm as steady as the machines themselves. Hands move without pause, feeding fabric into the needle, guiding seams with the precision of survival. For each finished piece, pennies are earned. For each mistake, wages vanish into nothing. The noise is a constant assault. The click of needles, the pounding of presses, the shouts of foremen straining to be heard above the din. Conversation is impossible. The workers' mouths may move, but their words are swallowed whole by the roar of industry. In this place, silence is not quiet. It is simply drowned out. Air grows heavy as the day wears on. Lint floats like pale snow, clinging to hair, to skin, to the insides of lungs. Each breath carries with it a reminder of what this work takes, what it steals from the body little by little. The heat builds even in winter, as machines hum and iron stoves radiate warmth meant to keep fabric supple, but which leaves workers faint and slick with sweat. A young girl adjusts her stool, feet barely touching the ground. She is quick with her hands, faster than most, and for this she will earn a few cents more by the week's end. Yet her shoulders ache, and her eyes blur from the endless focus. Childhood slips away quickly under the strain of work that leaves no time for play. Nearby, an older man coughs into his sleeve. The sound is sharp, cutting through the steady rhythm, before it is swallowed back into the noise. Illness is common here. When pay depends on presence, the sick drag themselves in, hiding fever and weakness as best they can. There are no sick days, no protections. Only the unyielding demand of production. Breaks are brief. 10 minutes, perhaps, for a crust of bread or a sip of water. The workers step outside to the narrow alley, breathing in air no cleaner than the dust inside, but grateful for the moment's change. Then the whistle blows, and they return, shoulders hunched once more. The foremen pace between rows, eyes sharp, voices louder than the machines. Their task is to keep the rhythm unbroken, to remind every worker that the company cannot afford delays, that mistakes are costly, that the line must move faster. For the men and women bent over their machines, the foreman's footsteps carry a weight heavier than the hum of gears. As hours pass, daylight fades from the high windows, leaving the factory dependent on dim bulbs strung overhead. Shadows lengthen, yet the work continues. 12 hours mark the full day, And when the whistle finally shrieks the signal of release, exhaustion clings to every body like a second skin. The factory is more than a workplace. It is a crucible. Here, the strength of immigrant families is tested daily. Wages earned beneath its roof pay for rent, for bread, for a chance at survival. Yet the cost is not counted only in dollars. It is measured in bent backs, failing lungs, and dreams postponed. As the doors open and the workers spill out into the night, the roar of machines fades behind them. But its echo lingers in the ringing of their ears, in the stiffness of their hands, in the certainty that tomorrow they will walk the same streets, pass through the same doors, and once again give their hours to the factory floor. Evening in the city brings with it a different rhythm. The smoke of factory chimneys still hangs in the air, and the ache of labor clings to tired shoulders. Yet the streets begin to hum with a quieter, more secretive energy. In 1921, America has entered a strange new era, an age where something as ordinary as a glass of wine or a pint of beer has become forbidden, and where shadows grow thickest just as night falls. The 18th Amendment had promised a nation of sobriety and moral order. Instead, it gave rise to hidden doors and whispered passwords, to men and women slipping past the gaze of the law in search of something both ordinary and illicit. The law may have closed the saloons, but it could not extinguish the thirst for company, music, and the sharp burn of alcohol. On corners where shops close early, men gather in low voices, waiting for a signal. Behind unmarked doors and down basement staircases, entire worlds unfold. These are the speakeasies, tucked away in cellars, warehouses, and back rooms of barbershops. They are not grand, at least not most of them. A single bulb may hang from the ceiling, smoke curling upward as patrons huddle close, their laughter low, their glasses raised in defiance of a government that insists on silence. In one such place, a piano player begins his tune. His fingers stumble at first, then find the rhythm, ragtime mixed with the early pulse of jazz. The music carries over the clink of glasses, filling the room with a warmth that no stove could ever provide. Couples sway in narrow spaces, feet brushing against wooden floors worn smooth by countless nights of quiet rebellion. The patrons are a mixture of faces. Dock workers with calloused hands sit beside men in suits whose cufflinks catch the light. Women, their hair bobbed short in the new style, sip from teacups that hold anything but tea. In this hidden corner, class distinctions blur, at least for a few hours. What matters is not who you are outside, but that you are here, together, safe for the moment from prying eyes. Yet danger is never far. Everyone listens for the sound of boots on the stairs, the knock too sharp to be a friend's. Raids are sudden, and bribes are often the only shield. Police officers, some stern and some willing to look the other way, move through these neighborhoods with watchful eyes. A bottle tucked away behind a counter might mean the difference between a night of laughter and a night in jail. For the immigrant families of New York, Prohibition adds another layer of hardship. Beer had once been cheap nourishment, safer to drink than water from tainted pipes. Wine had carried with it tradition, memory, and connection to homelands left behind. Now, even these small comforts are stolen away by decree. Still, the human spirit bends toward joy, And so new rituals are born in the dim light of hidden rooms. Stories circulate of barrels rolled through secret tunnels, of liquor smuggled in hollowed bread loaves, of gangsters growing rich while ordinary people simply try to hold on to pieces of their heritage. Organized crime begins to knit itself into the fabric of daily life, its influence stretching from alleyways to mansions. The very act of seeking out a drink becomes an entanglement with forces much larger than any individual. And yet, for those inside a speakeasy on a winter night, these troubles feel far away. The music swells, the laughter rises, the glow of forbidden spirits warms chilled bones. For a few hours, the weight of the world lifts, replaced by the fragile comfort of community. Outside, the streets remain dark and cold, the city guarded by laws that cannot still the heartbeat of its people. But in basements and back rooms, America reveals another face, one that refuses to be silenced, one that seeks joy even when joy is outlawed. It is here, in these hidden spaces, that the contradictions of the 1920s shine most clearly. A decade of progress shadowed by Prohibition, a people caught between obedience and defiance, survival and celebration. And when the doors finally open and patrons slip back into the night, they carry with them not just the taste of liquor, but the memory of belonging carved into the secrecy of the age. By the time the sun dips low and the glow of gas lamps begins to spread across the streets, the long day draws its weary circle back to the tenement. Inside, the small apartment fills once more with the sound of footsteps, the creak of hinges, and the shuffle of boots pulled from tired feet. Work is finished, but rest is still far away. Survival does not pause at sundown. In the cramped kitchen, the mother stirs a pot that has seen more years than it should, its surface blackened and dented from constant use. Tonight, like so many nights before, the meal is cabbage soup stretched thin with potatoes, flavored with little more than salt and determination. Beside it lies bread that has grown hard at the edges, softened now by steam rising from the pot. The aroma is humble, yet to hungry stomachs it is enough to summon gratitude. One by one, the children file in, placing satchels and coats wherever there is room. Their faces show the day's labor, some from hours at school, others from errands and apprenticeships that steal away their youth far too soon. They sit shoulder to shoulder around a table that can barely hold them, passing bowls, breaking bread into small pieces so that everyone may have a share. At last, the father arrives. His return is marked not by grand gesture, but by the familiar sound of boots on the stairwell, each step heavy with fatigue. His shoulders stoop from lifting loads at the docks, his hands red and raw from rope and cold water. Yet when he enters the room, a faint smile flickers across faces that have waited all day for this moment. For however brief, the family is whole again. They eat in near silence at first, the scrape of spoons and the sigh of relief as warm broth fills empty bellies. Hunger has a way of quieting conversation, but slowly, as bowls are emptied and stomachs steadied, voices begin to rise. Small stories of the day, lessons learned at school, whispers of gossip carried home from the factory floor. The father listens, nodding, his eyes heavy but attentive. He offers few words, yet his presence itself is an anchor, grounding the family in a world that often feels uncertain. There is little light in the room, only the dim glow of a single lamp turned low to save fuel. Shadows stretch long against the walls, softening the edges of cracked plaster and peeling paint. Outside the window, the noise of the city never ceases. Wagons rattling down cobblestones, laughter spilling from tenement steps, the distant rumble of the elevated train. But here, in this small square of space, there is a fragile sense of peace. The children lean into one another, drowsiness beginning to replace hunger. The mother clears the table with quiet efficiency, tucking away tomorrow's portion if any remains. She does not complain. She never does. Her strength is measured not in words, but in the way she makes something from nearly nothing, night after night. The father lights a cigarette, its smoke curling lazily in the dim air. He stares at the table as if measuring the weight of his family's needs against the strength left in his body. There is pride, but also worry. Rent due, wages uncertain, the threat of illness or injury ever present. These thoughts rarely leave him, though he carries them silently, shielding his children from their sharpest edges. When the meal is done, the family lingers. They have nowhere else to be, no entertainment save each other's company. A lull settles over the room, the kind of quiet that comes not from absence, but from presence, from being together, however imperfectly, in a world that is often unkind. And so, the day closes much as it began, in a room too small for the dreams it holds, in a home where survival is stitched into every moment. Yet within those walls, around that table, there remains something that hardship cannot erase. It is not abundance, but it is love. It is not comfort, but it is endurance. And for tonight, it is enough. Far from the noise of New York, another America awakens beneath a wide and endless sky. It is 1923 in rural Iowa, and the first light of dawn drifts across fields blanketed with frost. The horizon glows pale pink and gold, the colors mirrored in the stillness of frozen ponds, and the thin smoke rising from farmhouse chimneys. Here, life begins not with alarms or whistles, but with the crowing of roosters and the steady rhythm of chores that wait for no one. Inside a modest wooden farmhouse, the family stirs. The walls are rough, the floors creak, but there is space enough for breath, unlike the crowded tenements of the city. The cold presses against the window panes, frosting the glass into delicate patterns. A father pulls on heavy boots, worn from seasons of use, while a mother ties her shawl and stokes the kitchen stove to life. Children rub their eyes, reluctant to leave the warmth of quilts, yet they know the animals wait, and work is never late. The farmyard greets them with a chorus of sounds. Cows low impatiently from the barn, their warm breath steaming in the air. Chickens cluck and scratch in the straw, already restless for grain. A horse stamps its hooves against the frozen ground, waiting for its harness. Each creature depends on human hands, and each task must be done before the family can think of its own breakfast. The father moves toward the barn, lantern in hand, its glow carving small circles of light in the dim gray morning. He bends to the task of milking, the steady hiss and stream of milk hitting the pail creating a rhythm as old as farming itself. The mother scatters feed for the chickens, her skirt brushing against the frost-tipped grass. The children lend their hands where they can, carrying buckets, gathering eggs still warm beneath hens, laughing softly when the cold nips at their fingers. This is labor, but it is also life. There are no factory whistles here, no foreman pacing with stopwatches. Instead, there is the land itself, dictating the rhythm. Seasons set the pace, weather holds the final word, and the family bends to its will with a kind of humble acceptance. The sounds of the farm mingle with the scent of hay and manure, the earthy perfume of a life tied to soil and stock. In the east, the sun finally breaks above the horizon, gilding the fields in light. Icicles glisten along the eaves of the barn, catching the glow like crystal ornaments. For a moment, the world feels still, balanced between hardship and beauty. Inside the farmhouse, the stove crackles with renewed fire. The promise of warmth and food draws the family back in from the cold. Boots are scraped, hands thawed, and voices rise with a brightness that only morning can bring. A kettle whistles, filling the room with the smell of strong coffee, while bacon sizzles in a pan, the sound as comforting as any hymn. Soon, the table will be spread with fresh eggs, biscuits, and thick slices of ham. Simple fare, but rich compared to the meager rations of city families. This routine repeats each day, but it is never quite the same. Some mornings bring storms, others the clear promise of planting or harvest. Yet always there is the land, faithful and demanding, shaping the family's existence with a steady hand. In these early hours, as dawn gives way to full day, the farm stands as its own small universe. Beyond the fields, the country is changing. New machines, new roads, new voices on the radio. But here, in the quiet of an Iowa morning, life is still measured by the rising of the sun and the turning of the seasons. And so, another day begins. One born not from steel and smoke, but from soil, frost, and the enduring rhythm of the land. The first light of day has barely lifted when the work of the farm is already in full motion. In Iowa during the early 1920s, mornings are not quiet hours of leisure. They are the backbone of survival. Every member of the household has a role to play, and each task carries the weight of necessity. In the barn, the father crouches beside a patient cow, his hands steady on the worn wooden stool. The pail at his feet slowly fills, each stream of warm milk striking the tin with a comforting hiss. The cow shifts slightly, the sound of her breathing mixing with the rustle of hay. For generations, this rhythm has marked the start of a farmer's day, a humble but essential ritual. The eldest son carries buckets across the yard, boots crunching against frost that still lingers in shaded patches of ground. His breath fogs in the cold, but he walks with practiced ease, balancing the weight of water fetched from the well. He has learned early that strength is not only in the muscles, but in the steadiness of repetition. Nearby, a daughter collects eggs from the chicken coop. She moves carefully, lifting each hen with gentle hands, sliding her fingers beneath warm feathers to find the treasures hidden there. The eggs are placed into a woven basket, their fragile shells glowing pale in the dawn light. She knows they will be on the breakfast table soon, scrambled with cream or fried in bacon grease. The younger children, eager to help though not yet strong enough for heavy work, scatter grain for the chickens, laughing as the birds rush forward in a noisy flurry of wings. The horse stamps its hooves impatiently as the middle son straps on its harness, ready for the day's hauling and plowing. Even the family dog moves with purpose, circling the yard, herding stray chickens back toward the coop. Every sound, every gesture, builds into a kind of morning symphony. The creak of wooden doors, the splash of water into troughs, the steady munch of animals fed, the faint call of meadowlarks beginning their own day in the hedgerows. When the chores are done, the family returns to the farmhouse, drawn by the irresistible pull of warmth and food. Inside, the kitchen hums with its own rhythm. The mother stands at the stove, apron dusted with flour, hands moving with swift certainty. Biscuits are pulled from the oven, their golden tops glistening with a brush of butter. Bacon sizzles in a cast-iron pan, filling the air with its rich, smoky perfume. A pot of coffee bubbles nearby, strong and black, its aroma carrying through every room. The children tumble in, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms full of eggs and pails. The father follows, shoulders hunched from the weight of milk buckets, but his expression softens as he breathes in the familiar comfort of the kitchen. Work may be endless, but moments like this give it meaning. Soon the table is covered with hearty fare, platters of eggs, stacks of biscuits, slices of cured ham, and jars of preserves put up from the last summer harvest. Everyone finds a place, hands folded briefly in prayer before the meal begins. Then comes the sound of forks on plates, the low murmur of conversation, and the laughter of children who, for the moment, forget the weight of chores behind and the labor still ahead. This breakfast is more than nourishment. It is a reminder of the farm's rhythm, the way toil and reward circle one another, bound together. Without the chores, there would be no food. Without the food, there would be no strength for chores. The balance is delicate, yet enduring, passed down through generations like a promise written into the soil itself. As sunlight spreads across the fields and the warmth of the stove lingers in their bones, the family rises from the table, ready to face another day. Their bellies are full, their spirits steadied. Beyond the walls of the farmhouse, the world is changing fast. Cars, radios, and new inventions edging closer to rural life. But here, in this moment, breakfast has done what it always must. It has stitched the family together, preparing them for the endless demands of the land. There are moments in a family's life when the ordinary rhythm of days is broken by something entirely new, something that alters the way they see their place in the world. For one farm family in Iowa, that moment arrives in the shape of a machine, the Ford Model T. The road leading to the farmhouse is little more than a pair of wagon ruts carved into the soil, hardened by frost in winter and dusted with powder in summer. On this morning, a faint growl rises along that road, unfamiliar and thrilling. The children are the first to hear it. They race to the yard, eyes wide, pointing toward the horizon, where a dark shape grows larger with every second. Soon, the rattle and hum of an engine fills the air, unlike the sound of horses or wagons they have known all their lives. When the automobile pulls into view, sunlight glints off its black body, sturdy and simple, built not for elegance, but for endurance. The father grips the reins of the workhorse standing nearby, steadying it as the strange contraption sputters to a halt in front of the farmhouse. Dust swirls in its wake, and for a moment, the yard feels as though it belongs to a new century altogether. Neighbors gather at the fence line, drawn by the sound and the sight. Some shake their heads, muttering about extravagance. Others smile, unable to hide their wonder. For this family, the Model T is not a luxury. It is a promise. It has taken years of saving, selling extra grain, patching clothes instead of buying new, and putting off repairs that could wait. At last, the money was enough, and here it stands, a machine that will forever change the way they move across the land. The children circle it with awe, fingers tracing the smooth curves of the fenders. They peer inside at the simple dashboard, at the gear shift that looks more like a puzzle than a steering mechanism. One boy dares to touch the horn, and the sharp honk sends chickens scattering across the yard to the laughter of everyone present. The father's face is harder to read. He stands a little apart, hands resting on his hips, eyes fixed on the car as though trying to measure its worth against the sacrifices made. He sees more than novelty here. He sees freedom. Trips to town that once took a full day with horse and wagon will now be measured in minutes. Church on Sunday, visits to distant relatives, the hauling of supplies. Suddenly, the horizon feels closer. The world itself feels smaller. The mother approaches slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She smiles faintly, though her thoughts are practical. Gasoline will cost money. The roads are rough and unpredictable. Yet she knows what this machine means to her husband and children. And in her eyes, there is quiet pride. The salesman, who has driven the car from the nearest dealership, steps back and tips his cap. His work is done. The machine is delivered. But for the family, the true work is just beginning, learning how to master a contraption that can both empower and endanger. As the engine sputters and falls silent, a hush settles over the yard. The father places his hand on the hood, feeling the warmth radiate from within. For a long moment, no one speaks. Then, softly, he says what they are all thinking. She's ours. The arrival of the Model T is more than the purchase of a machine. It is the arrival of possibility itself, possibility that will ripple through every corner of their lives. In this single moment, a family rooted in the soil of Iowa steps firmly into the modern age, with wheels that will carry them farther than they have ever dreamed. The Model T may have arrived, but its true place in the family's life is not yet secure. Ownership alone is not enough. The real test lies in taming it, understanding the rattle of gears, the stubbornness of the crank, the strange dance of pedals that make it go. For a man who has spent his life guiding plows and wagons, learning to drive is both a thrill and a trial. On the first morning after its arrival, the father stands proudly beside the car, his hands resting on his hips. The children gather in a half circle, wide-eyed, as though watching a circus act about to begin. The mother lingers at the porch, torn between amusement and worry. Everyone knows this will not be easy. The first challenge is the crank. To bring the engine to life, the father bends low, grasping the handle with both hands. He has been warned of the kickback, a sudden, violent jerk that has broken more than a few wrists. He steels himself, takes a deep breath, and pulls. The engine coughs once, then falls silent. He pulls again. This time, the crank bucks against his grip, and he staggers backward to the sound of his children's laughter. "Try again, Papa," One of them calls, their voices ringing across the yard, and so he does. Sweat beads on his forehead, though the morning is cool. Again and again he pulls until, at last, the machine sputters awake. The engine rattles and shakes like a living thing, its noise startling the horse tied nearby. The children clap and cheer, though the mother crosses herself quietly, muttering that perhaps the old wagon was safer. With the engine running, the next lesson begins. The pedals of the Model T are unlike anything familiar. One to go forward, another to reverse, and a third for the brake. Yet they do not act as expected. The father presses one, and the car lurches forward with a sudden jolt, sending the children scattering. He stomps another, and the car shudders into reverse, nearly backing into the fence before he finds the brake at last. Dust rises in the yard as chickens flap and squawk in protest. Laughter ripples through the children, joined by nervous chuckles from the father himself. He wipes his brow, shaking his head, but there is no anger in him. He has known stubborn horses, balky plows, and weather that turned against him without warning. Compared to those, this new contraption is simply another test of patience. The next attempt is steadier. He learns to feather the pedals, to coax the car forward without jolts. The children run alongside, their hands brushing the fenders, as if afraid the machine might vanish should they let go. A short loop around the barn becomes a triumph. Dust billows behind the wheels, the sound of the engine echoing across the fields. Soon, the older children take their turns. They climb into the driver's seat, legs barely long enough to reach the pedals. Their laughter fills the yard as they mimic their father's earlier struggles. False starts, sudden stalls, jerky halts. Each attempt is met with cheers, each mistake with patience. In this way, the car becomes more than a machine. It becomes part of the family story, a new kind of hearth around which they gather. The mother watches from the doorway, her hands folded at her waist. Her smile is cautious, but genuine. She knows this car will bring change, trips to town, easier access to church, perhaps even visits to relatives too far to reach before. Yet she also knows it brings new risks. Breakdowns, accidents, the unpredictable costs of fuel and repairs. The Model T is both gift and burden. Like so many things that arrive with progress, as the sun climbs higher, the family leaves the yard for the open road, if one can call it that. It is little more than a stretch of dirt lined with fields, rutted by wagon wheels and softened by spring rains. The car rattles and bounces, but it moves. The children cheer. The father grins. And in that moment, despite every stall and every jolt, they feel the future pressing forward on four wheels. What once felt distant now begins to draw closer. For generations, rural families measured their lives by the seasons and the miles between their farms and the nearest town. Distance was something accepted, a natural boundary that shaped every choice. But with the Model T sitting proudly in the yard, those boundaries begin to bend. The first trips are cautious, tentative journeys along dirt roads that twist between cornfields and rolling pastures. The father grips the steering wheel with both hands, eyes fixed ahead, while the children bounce in the back seat, their laughter rising above the rattle of the tires. The horse-drawn wagon is left behind, and in its place comes a strange new feeling, the sense that the world is suddenly within reach. A trip to town, once planned days in advance, now takes a fraction of the time. Where once the family might pack a lunch and set out before dawn, they can now leave after chores and arrive before the sun climbs high. The market feels different when it is no longer an ordeal to reach it. Groceries, tools, cloth, and even small luxuries find their way into the farmhouse more often, changing the rhythm of daily life in quiet but profound ways. Sunday mornings, too, take on a new light. The long, weary journey to church, with children dozing in the back of a wagon, becomes a brisk drive along the open road. The family arrives fresher, dressed in their best, and they mingle with neighbors who have made similar journeys. Conversations in the churchyard begin to circle around cars, whose runs smoother, who managed to drive through the muddiest stretch of road, who dared to push past 20 miles an hour. Beyond errands and worship, the Model T opens doors to a wider community. Relatives once visited only on rare occasions suddenly seem closer. Aunts and uncles who lived miles away can be seen on a whim, the distance bridged not by horseflesh, but by gears and gasoline. Friendships strengthen, families knit tighter, and the isolation that once defined rural life begins to fade. The children feel the change most keenly. For them, the car is not just a tool, but an adventure. On summer evenings, they pile in for short drives through the countryside, their hair whipped by wind as fields blur into a green and gold sea. The horizon no longer seems so far, and with it, their dreams expand. They imagine futures that reach beyond the limits of their county lines, futures once thought impossible from the confines of a farmhouse porch. But with change comes unease. Older neighbors, content with wagons and walking, shake their heads at the noise and dust of automobiles. They warn of accidents, of debts owed for fuel and repairs, of a life moving too fast for its own good. Some mutter that the land itself will be forgotten if families spend more time on the road than in the fields. Still, progress has a way of settling in, of becoming ordinary. Before long, the sight of a car on a dirt road no longer draws every eye. Roads begin to improve, widened and flattened to meet the needs of wheels instead of hooves. Gasoline pumps appear beside general stores, and mechanics set up shop in barns once used for wagons. The countryside itself reshapes to meet the demands of the automobile. In these years, the rural world is neither lost nor untouched. It is stretched, connected, and slowly woven into the broader fabric of modern America. The farmhouse still rises with the dawn, still bends to the call of the seasons. But now its windows face a wider horizon. For one Iowa family, and for countless others like them, the Model T is more than a machine. It is a bridge. It carries them over miles once considered too far, into towns, churches, and lives that were always out of reach. And in doing so, it alters not only how they travel, but how they dream, pulling the rural world, mile by mile, into a new era of connection. In the heart of Pennsylvania, in a place like Millerville, the day begins in a way that feels at once ordinary and timeless. The year is 1925, and though the nation is changing quickly, small towns hold on to a rhythm that is steady and familiar. Morning comes not with the blare of factory whistles or the rattle of subway trains, but with softer sounds, the toll of a church bell in the distance, the faint whistle of a locomotive, the bark of a dog on some quiet street, The first light spills across tidy clapboard houses, their porches swept clean, their windows trimmed with lace curtains. A milk wagon makes its slow progress down Main Street, the horse's hooves striking the pavement in steady beats. Glass bottles clink gently as they are lifted and set upon doorsteps. In another doorway, the morning paper is delivered, its headlines carrying news of the wider world, politics in Washington, unrest in faraway lands, baseball scores from yesterday's game. Yet here, the stories that matter most are found in the cadence of daily life. Who is planting early this year? Which family has welcomed a new baby? Whose boy just got his driver's license? Shops along the main road begin to stir. A grocer props open his door, sweeping away the dust before arranging baskets of apples and onions outside. The butcher sharpens his knives while the smell of fresh bread drifts from the bakery, warm and sweet enough to draw passers-by inside. For many families, the morning trip into town is as much about conversation as it is about supplies. Neighbors pause at street corners, exchanging greetings, asking after each other's health, speaking of weather and crops in tones that carry both hope and worry. Children move in clusters, books tucked beneath their arms, skipping along sidewalks that still glisten with dew. Their laughter echoes through narrow streets, weaving between the measured steps of grown men on their way to the post office or the bank. An automobile or two passes by, shiny Fords and Chevrolets, raising small clouds of dust as they head toward the open road. They are not yet so common as to be unremarkable, and heads still turn when the hum of an engine rolls through town. At the train depot, the early passenger service pulls in, steam rising in white plumes against the morning sky. A handful of travelers disembark, greeted by waiting relatives or carrying valises toward the boarding house across the street. The railroad has long been the town's tether to the larger world, bringing in goods, carrying away crops, and reminding residents that though their town feels self-contained, it is never truly isolated. On another corner, a cafe fills with familiar voices. Men sip their first cups of coffee, while the proprietor flips eggs on the griddle, the smell of bacon filling the room. Talk ranges from politics to farming prices, to last night's sermon at church. The pace is unhurried, the tone easy, as though the morning itself extends the promise of time. There is comfort in the ordinariness of it all. A woman hangs laundry on a line strung between two backyards, sheets fluttering in the breeze. A blacksmith wipes soot from his hands as he lifts the latch on his workshop door. Even the sound of a dog barking at the postman feels like a thread in the larger fabric of the morning. By mid-morning, the town is fully awake. Millerville is not bustling like New York, nor ambitious like Chicago. Its life is smaller, its pace gentler, but in that very simplicity lies its strength. In the mid-1920s, places like this carried a sense of balance, a bridge between the rural farms that surrounded them and the modern world creeping ever closer. As the church bell strikes the hour, the town settles into its daily rhythm. Life here is not dramatic, nor filled with spectacle. It is steady, familiar, and deeply human. And for the families who call Millerville home, there is quiet pride in knowing that while cities may roar and change, their small town remains a place where the mornings begin with peace, and where every day feels like an echo of the one before. By the middle of the decade, a new kind of American life is taking shape. It is neither the crowded struggle of the tenement nor the rugged labor of the farm, but something that sits in between, a world defined by steady wages, suburban streets, and the quiet pride of comfort. For families who have climbed into this middle ground, the 1920s offer glimpses of a dream that once felt out of reach. Step inside a modest, well-kept home on a quiet street in Ohio, or Illinois, or Pennsylvania, and you find a world where small luxuries begin to feel like everyday things. The morning light filters through lace curtains into a dining room where a polished oak table is set for breakfast. A radio hums softly in the background, its wooden cabinet gleaming, its dial glowing faintly as voices and music drift across invisible airwaves. Only a decade earlier, such a marvel would have seemed like science fiction. Now it sits comfortably beside the family Bible and a vase of fresh flowers. On the kitchen stove, bacon sizzles in a cast-iron pan. A pot of coffee percolates, sending its rich aroma into every corner of the house. The mother moves with quiet efficiency, plates in hand, apron tied neatly at her waist. The father emerges from the bedroom in a pressed shirt and suspenders, his face freshly shaven, the smell of soap and aftershave lingering. He is no tycoon, no magnate of industry, but his job at the office or the factory pays enough to support his family, to keep the pantry stocked, to ensure the children attend school instead of work. The children file in, hair combed, shoes polished. Their school books rest in satchels by the door, ready for the walk to school. They slide into their chairs with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never knowing true hunger. On the table before them are eggs, toast with butter, jam in a glass jar, and slices of fruit. It is not abundance, but it is enough, and enough in this age feels like luxury. Conversation flows easily. The father mentions an article he read in the morning paper, its crisp pages folded neatly beside his plate. The mother talks about the neighbors coming by in the evening. The children chatter about arithmetic tests and baseball games at recess. There is no urgency, no edge of survival pressing against every word. Instead, there is balance. Life measured in schedules and routines rather than in scarcity and strain. Around them, the house itself tells a story. Electric lights glow in the hall, replacing kerosene lamps. A telephone hangs on the wall, its receiver resting in its cradle, ready to connect them to relatives or shopkeepers with the turn of a crank. Rugs soften the floors. Photographs in silver frames capture moments that would once have passed unnoticed. Each object is a marker of progress, of a family moving gently upward in the world. Outside, the neighborhood echoes with the same quiet prosperity. Automobiles sit in driveways beside tidy houses. Lawns are trimmed, porches swept. Neighbors greet each other as they head to work or school. The world is changing fast. New inventions, new fashions, new ideas spreading through radio and print. And the middle class is at the center of that change, living lives that balance tradition with the pull of modernity. For these families, the comforts of the 1920s are not about excess. They are about security, about the peace of knowing that tomorrow will look much like today. There is joy in the small things, a fresh loaf of bread from the bakery, a new record for the phonograph, the simple comfort of a warm home on a cold evening. These are the markers of progress, the signposts of a dream quietly realized, As the children finish their breakfast and gather their books, as the father folds his newspaper and rises for work, the house settles into its daily rhythm. It is not dramatic, not filled with struggle or spectacle, but it is steady and it is safe. And for countless families in the 1920s, this was the greatest comfort of all, to belong to a world where life could be counted in routines, where progress was measured not in riches, but in the simple assurance of enough. By the middle of the decade, a new rhythm beats in the lives of America's young people, one that feels distinctly their own. For the first time in history, teenagers begin to form a culture separate from their parents, shaped not only by school and family, but by music, movies, and the freedom of gathering in small-town streets and city corners. On a warm Saturday evening, the soda fountain glows like a beacon on Main Street. Inside, laughter and chatter rise above the hiss of carbonated water and the clink of glassware. Young men in flat caps lean against the counter, while girls in bobbed hair and drop-waist dresses sip from straws, their eyes sparkling with mischief. They talk of baseball games, of who danced with whom at last night's social, of the latest picture showing at the local theater. The movies are no longer just an occasional treat. Nickelodeons have given way to ornate picture houses, their marquees lit by rows of electric bulbs that glitter against the night sky. Young couples buy tickets and settle into velvet seats, the smell of buttered popcorn drifting through the aisles. On the screen, Charlie Chaplin stumbles with comic grace, while Rudolph Valentino smolders in a romance that leaves young women sighing and young men straightening their collars. For a few hours, the world outside disappears, replaced by moving pictures that stir the imagination and set hearts racing. And then there is the music. Jazz. The Charleston, the foxtrot, and other new dances sweep across the country like wildfire. From gramophones in middle-class parlors to live bands in city ballrooms, the syncopated rhythms are impossible to ignore. For many parents, the music sounds wild, even dangerous, its horns and drums urging bodies to move in ways that feel too free, too modern. But for the young, it is liberation. At school gyms converted into dance halls, at small-town pavilions lit with strings of bulbs, the music brings them together in a swirl of laughter, sweat, and rebellion. The clothing matches the tempo of this new age. Young women shed the restrictive corsets of their mother's generation in favor of lighter dresses that swing as they dance. Hemlines rise, hair is cropped short, and makeup is applied with confidence. Young men, too, adopt a style all their own: slicked hair, wide-legged trousers, and a casual swagger that signals they are not bound by the old ways. It is not only in cities that this culture takes root. Even in small towns, miles from the bright lights of Chicago or New York, young people gather around radios to catch the latest jazz broadcast. They mimic the steps they have read about in magazines or seen in movie reels, practicing in living rooms and barns until they are ready to show off at the next social. A single record can turn an evening into a celebration, its grooves carrying the heartbeat of a new generation. For parents and grandparents, these changes bring mixed feelings. They remember long days of labor, of responsibility pressed upon them before youth had a chance to bloom. Now they watch their sons and daughters laugh more freely, dress more boldly, dream more widely. Some worry it is too much, too fast. Others smile quietly, recognizing that every generation finds its own voice. The 1920s become the first decade where being young feels like an identity in itself. Movies give them heroes, jazz gives them rhythm, and the soda fountain gives them a stage on which to perform the drama of adolescence. Theirs is a world of promise, of freedom, tasted for the first time in stolen dances and whispered conversations. And though the decades to come will bring new styles, new sounds, and new ways of living, something about this moment remains singular. In the laughter echoing from a soda shop, in the applause that fills a movie house, in the swing of a Charleston step on a polished floor, there is the essence of youth itself, captured forever in the golden light of the 1920s. By the middle of the 1920s, a new voice enters American homes. Not a neighbor at the door, not a preacher from the pulpit, but a voice carried invisibly through the air. The radio, with its glowing tubes and gentle static, becomes the hearth around which families gather. More than a machine, it is a window into a world larger than any one household could imagine. Picture a living room in 1926. A family settles into their evening, lamps casting pools of light across worn rugs and polished wood. The radio cabinet, tall and proud, stands like a piece of furniture, both familiar and strange. The children sit cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide, their ears tuned to the crackling speaker. The parents lean back in their chairs, the day's labor fading as a new kind of companionship fills the room. At first, the programs are simple. Music carried from distant studios, news read in steady tones. But soon, the radio becomes a stage for the nation itself. A president's voice, once distant and abstract, now arrives in real time, echoing in kitchens and parlors from Maine to California. Families who once read speeches in the morning paper now hear them as they happen, the cadence and conviction intact. It is as if the country breathes together, pausing in unison to listen. Entertainment follows quickly. Comedy sketches bring laughter that rings out across neighborhoods. Dramatic readings stir emotions once reserved for theater stages. Baseball games, called pitch by pitch, allow fans hundreds of miles away to feel as though they are sitting in the stands. The crowd roars through the speaker, and in that sound, isolation melts away. There's a particular intimacy in those evenings. The family does not simply listen, they imagine. They picture the announcer's face, the crowd in the ballpark, the orchestra in some faraway city. In doing so, they become part of something larger, a shared story that binds millions of Americans in a common moment. Even in small towns, where the pace of life remains slow, the radio brings a sense of connection. A farmer who has spent the day in the fields now hears jazz from New Orleans or a weather forecast from Washington. A mother, rocking her baby to sleep, finds comfort in the voice of a singer whose name she may never know. In lonely farmhouses and bustling city apartments alike, the radio's glow makes the night feel less empty. The cost of a set is not trivial, but families save, budget, and sacrifice to bring one into their homes. Once it arrives, it is treated with reverence. Fathers adjust the dials carefully. Mothers dust its polished surface. Children gaze at it as if it were alive, and in many ways, it is alive. A companion that speaks, entertains, informs, and unites. critics warn of its dangers. Some fear it will keep children from reading, that it will fill minds with shallow amusements. Others worry about the influence of voices uncontrolled, pouring into households without filter. But those concerns do little to slow its spread. By the decade's end, radios are everywhere, woven into the fabric of daily life. Perhaps the greatest gift of the radio is not the programs themselves, but the way it gathers people. Neighbors are invited over to hear a special broadcast. Friends lean in, laughing or gasping together as a story unfolds. Families who might otherwise drift into silence at the end of a long day now share a common focus, their hearts beating in time with the voices that spill from the speaker. In an age defined by change, the radio becomes a steady presence. It bridges distances, shrinks the vastness of America, and reminds its listeners that they are not alone. And as static fades into song, as news gives way to laughter, one thing is clear. The radio is more than a machine. It is a bond, a chorus, a gathering place for a nation learning to hear itself for the very first time. While many Americans faced long hours in factories or the relentless demands of farm work, there were others who lived in a world set apart, where the hardships of daily survival seemed distant, softened by privilege and wealth. In Lake Forest, Illinois, just north of Chicago, the homes of the elite stood as monuments to prosperity, echoing the grandeur of a country in its gilded mood. Morning here unfolded in a different rhythm. Imagine a stately mansion perched on manicured lawns, its columns and wide verandas bathed in the soft light of dawn. Inside, the day began not with the clang of factory whistles or the crow of a rooster, but with the quiet movement of servants, drawing curtains, setting trays of coffee and cream upon polished silver. The air smelled faintly of lilacs carried in from gardens that stretched across acres, tended not by the family themselves, but by hired hands. In an upstairs chamber, sunlight filtered through lace drapes, touching gilt-framed portraits and carved mahogany furniture. The lady of the house stirred awake beneath embroidered linens, her day already made comfortable by the quiet labor of others. A maid entered softly, laying out a dress for the morning, shoes polished to a mirror's shine. On a side table, steaming coffee waited beside a porcelain cup, its surface thin as eggshell, imported from Europe. The master of the house began his morning differently still. Perhaps he lingered in a library lined with leather-bound volumes, reading the financial pages while smoke curled upward from a cigar. His interests might stretch far beyond Lake Forest, investments in factories, stocks and railroads, ventures tied to the same world of labor and industry that kept others working 12-hour days. Yet here, in his oak-paneled retreat, those realities felt like abstractions, far removed from the polished calm of his surroundings. The children of wealth, too, lived within a sphere of abundance. They were dressed neatly by governesses, their shoes buckled and their lessons prepared. Breakfast might include eggs and cream, pastries and fruit out of season, delicacies carried by train from distant coasts. Their laughter carried across wide hallways as they prepared for private schools or a day of leisure, riding ponies, practicing piano, or visiting neighbors whose estates mirrored their own. To step outside was to enter a world of refinement. Gravel driveways curved past fountains and gardens trimmed with precision. Automobiles, sleek, chauffeur-driven, waited under porte cochere, gleaming as emblems of progress and privilege. Beyond the manicured hedges lay Lake Michigan, its waters glittering in the morning sun, where sailing clubs and private beaches gave the wealthy their own form of escape. But beneath the beauty of this world, there was also a certain fragility. The extravagance, the glittering dinners, the constant pursuit of fashion and status. They masked an unease, a sense that such prosperity could not stretch endlessly into the future. Servants whispered of extravagance, neighbors competed in displays of grandeur, and families quietly worried about the volatility of markets upon which their fortunes depended. Still, in those mornings of 1927, the illusion of permanence held strong. Breakfast was served in dining rooms with ceilings painted in soft fresco, light pouring through tall windows onto crystal and silver. Conversations lingered on travel plans, summer retreats, and the latest gossip from Chicago society. Life in Lake Forest was not lived in the cadence of toil, but in the ease of privilege, as if hardship belonged to another country altogether. For the wealthy, the 1920s offered not only comfort, but spectacle, their lives a mirror of the glittering image America liked to hold of itself. Yet just beyond the edges of their lawns, the real nation went on. Workers punching factory clocks, farmers struggling to coax crops from tired soil, immigrants sharing tenement rooms. And though the walls of these estates seemed to separate one world from another, both were bound to the same unfolding decade, one of dazzling promise and of shadows just beyond the horizon. As the sun slipped beyond the horizon and twilight settled across the manicured lawns of Lake Forest, the wealthy turned their gaze toward the night. Here, in the later years of the 1920s, evenings unfolded in dazzling spectacle. Mansions lit with electric chandeliers glowed against the dark, their windows spilling music and laughter into the summer air. It was the age of the grand party, a season when fortune and pleasure were worn as proudly as jewels, and the illusion of endless prosperity carried men and women far into the night. Imagine approaching one of these gatherings. The driveway curves beneath towering trees as polished cars arrive in a steady stream. Chauffeurs opening doors, guests stepping down in gowns of silk and tuxedos pressed to perfection. Inside, a string quartet might welcome arrivals with lilting notes before giving way to the vibrant pulse of jazz. In rooms adorned with marble floors and mirrored walls, flappers swirled, feathers and beads catching the light. The Charleston echoed in laughter, champagne glasses clinked, and the air seemed thick with both confidence and denial. The ban on alcohol, written into law only a few years before, was more often mocked than observed. Behind closed doors, Prohibition faded into farce. Bottles of whiskey smuggled from Canada, gin mixed into cocktails, champagne poured freely. Wealth had its way of bending rules. Silver trays floated through the crowd, each drink another reminder that laws applied differently when one lived behind stone gates and velvet curtains. The speakeasies of the city may have thrived in shadows, but here, in the glow of chandeliers, the defiance was open, unspoken, and indulgent. At the center of these evenings were the hosts, eager to display not only wealth, but influence. Conversation drifted from the stock market's dizzying heights to new summer homes rising on the coasts. There was talk of automobiles faster than ever before, of ocean liners, of flights that carried the bold across the Atlantic. Guests spoke as though prosperity itself had no ceiling, as though the world had settled into permanent brilliance. Yet beneath the sparkle lay a quiet uncertainty few dared to name. For those who worked the kitchens, the musicians hired to play until dawn, the maids moving silently through the rooms, these parties were spectacles observed at a distance. They caught glimpses of gowns shimmering like water, of jewels flashing in candlelight, but returned to their duties with bowed heads. The contrast between servant and guest was sharp, yet both belonged to the same night, two worlds colliding within the same gilded walls, and always there was music. Jazz pulsed through the decades, carrying with it the daring energy of youth. Trumpets cried, pianos leapt, and dancers lost themselves to rhythm. Couples spun across the floor, skirts twirling, shoes striking the polished wood. It was a soundtrack to an era that believed itself untouchable, an anthem of both liberation and illusion. By the early morning hours, the party still burned on, cigarette smoke curling above conversation, laughter softened by fatigue, fortunes wagered in card games at side tables. Outside, the first light crept into the sky, casting pale silver over the gardens. Guests stepped carefully into waiting cars, women gathering fur stoles against the chill, men adjusting ties loosened by the night's revelry. Servants closed the heavy doors, extinguished the lamps, and the mansion returned to its silence, as though nothing had happened at all. To recall these nights is to see both the brilliance and the fragility of the 1920s. The wealthiest Americans had built their lives upon foundations that seemed unshakable. Yet these grand parties, with their endless flow of champagne and their glittering excess, were as much illusion as reality. They reflected a nation swept up in confidence, but also one standing unknowingly at the edge of collapse. For a time, though, the music drowned out doubt. For a time, the night sparkled, and the wealthy danced as if the dawn would never come. By the late 1920s, America seemed to hum with movement. Across the land, steel rails, winding roads, and open skies carried people farther and faster than ever before. The country that had once been vast and distant now felt a little smaller, a little more connected, as trains, planes, and automobiles reshaped daily life. Picture the scene in 1928. A Pullman car rocking gently along polished tracks, the hiss of steam outside and the rhythmic click of wheels on rails. Inside, passengers rested in upholstered seats, curtains drawn against the glare of the sun. Families traveling for holidays, businessmen with newspapers tucked under their arms, and soldiers returning from duty all shared the same narrow corridor. A porter in crisp uniform passed through, offering water, polishing shoes, ensuring the journey was as comfortable as possible. For many, the train was more than a way to get somewhere. It was an experience of elegance and efficiency, a rolling reminder that America's horizons were widening. And then there was the sky. Aviation, once the daring dream of inventors and barnstormers, was becoming real for ordinary people. The Ford Tri-Motor, nicknamed the Tin Goose, took its first passengers aloft. Its corrugated metal body rattled against the wind, but the thrill of seeing farms, towns, and rivers stretch beneath you was something unforgettable. The plane was noisy, shaky, and far from luxurious, yet those who flew in it spoke of a freedom unlike anything else. For the first time in history, the heavens felt within reach. The earth that once required days to cross could now be spanned in hours. On the ground, the automobile completed the picture of a nation in motion. The Model T had introduced cars to the common man earlier in the decade, but by the late 1920s, the landscape had truly changed. Roads, once little more than muddy trails, were paved and stretched farther into the countryside. Gas stations began dotting highways. Families piled into their cars for Sunday drives, trips to the seaside, or visits to relatives in towns they once seldom reached. Teenagers discovered independence behind the wheel, courting sweethearts or simply feeling the rush of speed on an open road. The hum of engines became the new heartbeat of America. The roads themselves were taking shape in iconic ways. In 1926, Route 66 was established, a ribbon of asphalt stretching from Chicago to Los Angeles. It became more than a road. It was a promise, for farmers leaving the Dust Bowl, for adventurers seeking the Pacific, for families searching for opportunity. Route 66 was a pathway to new beginnings. By 1928, its traffic was steady, lined with roadside diners, motor courts, and billboards announcing what lay ahead. In its humblest form, it represented a freedom that had long been out of reach for the average American family. Together, these modes of travel reshaped how Americans saw themselves. No longer confined to their neighborhoods, towns, or even their states, people began to think in terms of an interconnected nation. A young boy in Ohio could dream of Hollywood. A farmer in Kansas could board a train to Chicago and arrive by morning. A daring traveler could fly from New York to Detroit in less time than it once took to ride across a county by horse. The vastness of America had not disappeared, but it had become conquerable. Of course, these changes brought with them illusions of permanence. The ease of movement gave people a sense that the world would continue to speed forward without pause. In the soft glow of a Pullman lamp, in the roar of a tri-motor's engines, in the dust rising behind a Model A on a dirt road, Americans felt carried by momentum itself. They believed they were stepping into a future where anything was possible. For a brief, brilliant moment, the nation moved as one. Steel, rubber, and wings bridged the distances between lives and dreams. The journey was no longer a burden. It was part of the promise. And while storm clouds gathered on the horizon, in those years before the crash, America's roads, rails, and skies were alive with the sound of motion, carrying millions into tomorrow. As the decade drew to its close, America seemed to stand at a shining crossroads. In the 10 short years since the guns of the Great War had fallen silent, the nation had leapt forward with a confidence unmatched in its history. Cities had risen taller, farms had reached further, factories had grown louder, and homes had filled with the hum of new inventions. To live in the 1920s was to feel as though the world was speeding forward, carrying everyone along in its current. But behind that sense of triumph was a quieter truth. For the immigrant family in their cramped tenement, survival was still a daily struggle. For the farmer on the plains, debts mounted alongside harvests. For the factory worker, the hours were long and the pay uncertain. Even those who gathered in mansions under glittering chandeliers lived with a quiet unease, aware that fortune could turn as quickly as the seasons. Still, in those years, Hope was stronger than fear. Americans of every background believed in progress, believed that tomorrow would be brighter, easier, kinder. They pinned their dreams on the radio's warm voice, on the promise of the open road, on the reach of airplanes stitching the nation together. A new middle class was finding comfort in modest homes with electricity and telephones, while young people filled dance halls with the Charleston, chasing the rhythms of jazz. For a moment, it felt as though the past had been left behind and only possibility lay ahead. No one could see the storm clouds gathering, not fully. The stock market ticked ever higher. Credit flowed freely. Factories produced more than the world could consume. On the surface, it seemed unshakable. But deep within the nation's fabric, tensions pulled and threads strained. Farmers borrowed against uncertain harvests. Investors gambled fortunes on paper profits, and families stretched themselves thin to keep pace with modern life. And yet, in reflecting on those days, it is not the impending crash that lingers most in memory. It is the way ordinary people lived with courage and conviction. The mother who stitched by lamplight so her children might eat. The father who turned the crank of a new car with a smile that felt like pride. The child who listened, wide-eyed, to a president's voice carried across the airwaves. The farmer who rose with the dawn and found meaning in labor. Even the wealthy, behind their gates and gardens, longed for connection, for a sense that their fortunes carried weight beyond themselves. The 1920s were many things at once, a time of dazzling speed, of widening gaps, of dreams both realized and deferred. They were a stage set for the hardships of the Great Depression, yes, but also a decade that built the foundation for the modern America to come. Out of its jazz clubs, its barns, its offices, and its crowded kitchens, a culture emerged that still echoes today. And so, as we look back from a century's distance, we do not remember only the crash that followed. We remember the laughter on sidewalks, the smell of bread in immigrant neighborhoods, the hum of radios at dusk. We remember fathers teaching children to drive on dusty roads and mothers ladling soup into chipped bowls with quiet grace. We remember the sense of motion, of possibility, of lives stitched together in hope. Now, dear listener, let your thoughts drift as softly as the lights of that decade once faded into night. Imagine the glow of a street lamp on cobblestones, the hush of a farmhouse after supper, the faint strains of a jazz tune carried through the open windows of a summer evening. The world of the 1920s is gone, but its memories remain, quiet, tender, and still alive in the American heart. Thank you for spending this time with Sleepytown Radio. May these stories keep you company as you settle deeper into rest. Close your eyes, breathe gently, and let the echoes of another time guide you into dreams. From all of us here, good night, and may your sleep be peaceful